I'm Al McFarlane. Welcome to the conversation with Al McFarlane. Today is Thursday, October 13th, 2022. I'm glad to be here and glad to have you along as well. Today, I call in an affectionate way a show of companions, people that are friends, some long-term friends, some longer-term friends, but people that sit with each other and discuss issues, ideas, challenges, share stories, tell jokes, comment on family and community and the world, and do it in a way that honors each of us and honors the opportunity we have to be alive, I think. So let me start with saying hi to Brenda Lyle-Gray, who's with me every day of the week on this program. Brenda, how are you? Good to see you again.
Fine. How are you, Al?
You'll see in Monday's paper a suite of stories by Brenda that were well executed. A story on comments made by Jeremiah Ellison in response to the violence and drug use and general, pressure, a lack of safety perceived at the corner of West Broadway and Glendale in North Minneapolis. And then a second story, kind of presented as a sidebar, is her column that reflects on comments being made by Jeremiah Ellison's dad, Keith Ellison, Minnesota's Attorney General, who this story indicates is bringing the power of the state to aid the community in addressing dysfunction and consequential lack of safety in North Minneapolis. And I see David Rabb is checking in saying, hey, friends, send David a link. Maybe David can join the program. Hi, David. Thank you for checking in. The third part in that series that Brenda wrote for today is a capsulation of comments by Inspector Charlie Adams, who leads the 4th Precinct, and the Glendale and Broadway community is his area of responsibility. And he talks about that, but he talks about the general crisis that fentanyl and other opiates are presenting to our community about the work they're doing to try to remove the presence, distribution of that drug in particular, drugs in general, but also his policy about what to do with people that are addicted. And he says in her story that he's not going to be arresting addicts because arresting an addict is not the problem. The solution is in finding mental health professionals that can give guidance, direction, and move individuals and therefore community families towards healing in the midst of an onslaught against us by illicit, illegal, and dangerous drugs, fentanyl being one of the most dangerous we've experienced for a very, very long time. So, Brenda, kudos to you. Good job. Good
A lot
job.
of work, but the inspector surprised me though, Al. I thought, well, all three of them had good information that I think the community needs to know that this work is going on with them. It was the bold move on the Attorney General's part, but he specifically said, if it's legal for me to do, I'm going to act upon it. And but when he said that he wouldn't um,
Arrest
arrest
addicts.
an
Yeah.
addict,
Mhm.
and I said, bravo to you.
Mhm.
He said these people are addiction professionals, and they're being paid by either the state or the city to do this work, and they can't holler danger. All of the police would do the same thing
I
because
think
they're so smart right now. They know how to shoot under the protective vest. So no, I it was a toughie because it was so many words and they had so much to say, but it was a lot of good information, I think, that other communities could use, like Albuquerque. It's the second most dangerous city in the country for a size. And every morning you wake up, there's a homicide.
I think what Charlie Adams was saying, what I interpret from his comments, was that we simply need more of our people in the healing arts, in the healing professions, that there is room. And the question is, why are we not fully funding and therefore fully utilizing organizations like Turning Point, a culturally specific resource that organizes itself to address addiction of all kinds in our community? So I think that's the message I'm taking away, that we need to move public policy to put the resources into our own way of knowing, way of serving, and analyzing. With that, let me bring in our other colleagues, both Raket Asar and Ndugu Yusef Mgeni. Good afternoon to both of you. Good to see you both. Thank you for being here.
Good afternoon, Al, Brenda, and Raket. Al, I'm glad that you pointed out this is a public health issue, because for decades we've treated it as a criminal issue in terms of drug addiction. And drug addiction not only affects drug addicts, there are multiple victims, layers of victims, families, neighbors, community, nonprofits, churches, organizations within the community. The whole notion of public safety or quality of life is impacted by a public health issue. And until and unless the legislature and Hennepin County, who has the primary responsibility and funding for chemical health, public health issues, provides the resources necessary for Turning Point and other organizations addressing this issue, it's going to continue to be a policy of containment in North Minneapolis. As long as it's only on Broadway and Fremont or Broadway and Lindale, it's not an issue, not a concern for the larger community. And that's BS, because this affects the quality of life for this community and for future generations.
And there are three layers to this that I'll just second, Raket, that I think of immediately. One is the continued devaluation of Black pain, Black life, Black suffering, things that lead to that condition of addiction in our people. And our people, in that regard, I hold up as human beings, vulnerable to chemicals and to circumstances and to stressors that lead us into bad decisions that get us addicted. That's number one. But then the cynic in me, Brother Yusef, also talks about or speaks to the convenience of creating a network of businesses and services that manage the pain, so that in effect you almost are creating a fishing pond or a pool, a wealth pool, where I say this all the time: we get the misery, they get the money. Who's profiting on our propensity to find ourselves in stress and crisis, in addiction? Who profits, and how do we break that chain? And then finally,
well, and Al, that also feeds into the criminal justice layer.
Absolutely.
Okay? In terms of where people are assigned for treatment, support, assistance, and resources.
Yeah, well, that's my third point. Sister Raket, good to see you. How you doing?
I'm doing great.
Dr. Irma is here too. Bring Dr. Irma in as well. So go ahead.
Stranger.
Good to see you.
Stranger superstar.
Good afternoon, Dr. Irma.
Good afternoon. This is very timely in terms of the subject, because one of the pieces I'm writing about, Al, is about Daniel Prude. He was a young man in Rochester, New York, who had mental health issues, and his family called the police to assist him, and they ended up killing him. He died exactly 2 months, March, April, May, 3 months and 2 days before George Floyd, with a knee on his chest, asphyxiation. And the family has settled for $12 million. And my question is 12 million sufficient? He's got 5 children. You take out the lawyer's fees and you're only talking about $1.5 million per person. Is that enough for children who will never see their father again, who are relatively young? I think the oldest is like in his 20s, but the rest are young children. And is $1 million going to cover the loss of a father?
Don't take out taxes, Irma. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So are those kinds of settlements taxable as well?
That's a good question.
Probably.
Not my lane. I would assume that
Yep.
it's considered income.
I don't think they're taxable when it's a settlement, but the lawyer's fees cost about 35%. Generally, the range is 30 to 35% of what the settlement is.
Plus any trial costs.
That may be true as well, exactly. So we're talking, maybe they walk away with $1 million per child, but is that going to cover them for the rest of their life and the loss of a father? And the question is, what is the value, of a life, of a Black life in America?
Absolutely. Well, let's bring Sister Raquette Siarsa in. Raquette, how you doing, sister?
I'm doing well. I'm enjoying listening to this conversation. It's good to see you, Brother Yusef, and good to meet you, Dr. Irma. I was just going to jump in a little while ago because in regards to your comments that you said in regards to the public health issue with what we're seeing now, it wasn't until the 90s when they did some studies that led to looking at drug abuse and some of these other mental health related issues as health related problems. When you look at the ACEs studies that was done in the early 90s, that did not include a lot of people of, African descent and other marginalized communities. It was primarily white families that were recruited for that study, but that led to the determination that drug abuse and all these other environmental issues that people use as a way to kind of soothe or cope with whatever it is they're being ailed by are things that leads to, health related issues. And I think we have to push as a community to acknowledge the fact that we've been in substandard housing, substandard health related, support, just substandard living that actually leads to a lot of these things. And it's not just divorce, which is one of them, divorce, any kind of childhood adverse experiences that leads to a child being somewhat not adjusted well. So I just wanted to add that piece because I think that study kind of shed a light on how you can decriminalize some of the behaviors we later on see in life, but it was not specifically meant to or targeted or included our community. And I think we have to actually understand that it should, because of the damage that's been done to our community historically.
And I think you make some excellent points, and I want to speak to the way in which things are classified and categorized, because, and I'll speak to Minneapolis specifically. When I was doing UROC, one of the things we did was a community-based study, meaning that we actually hired and involved community people in looking at the impact of the mortgage foreclosure on individual, family, and community health and wellness. And we defined it in that way because we were seeing the communities being devastated by the people losing their houses. And the reason I say that is what most people didn't know is that 56% of all the mortgage foreclosures in the city of Minneapolis happened in the 3 zip codes that UROC was in. Okay, that's North Minneapolis, 56%. So we were seeing people committing suicide. We're seeing the breakup of family, like losing the house. These are like the consequences of it. And we were also seeing children being disrupted. They wake up, they go to bed in a house, and then they wake up sleeping on someone's couch because the family has moved because they've lost the home, right? And what was happening in terms of the material, the resources, all of the resources were being put into nonprofits, mostly run by whites, who were doing financial literacy. Well, if people are committing suicide, if they're getting divorced, if the children are, if their whole way of being is being disrupted, financial literacy is not the solution. And so we were trying to focus on what were some of the issues that families were facing, but also How do you define the health of a community? When its leaders leave because they've lost their home, then that community is facing ill health. And we don't talk about health in that way, but we should.
Dr. Irma, there's an article in the Pioneer Press this morning, and the African-American female president of the Minneapolis Association of Realtors initiated a task force, and she personally issued an apology on behalf of her association for the racism that has existed within their organization and the manner in which they have denied the opportunity to build Black wealth for African Americans through home ownership in the city of Minneapolis. And they're implementing a number of trainings for the new people who become realtors in Minneapolis on unconscious bias and some of the racism within the industry. They're removing the information on whether or not applicants for a mortgage received any kind of special grant targeted to people of color. And they're also asking the State Realtors Association to conduct similar policy changes and initiatives, including targeted efforts aimed specifically at Blacks in Minneapolis and the state of Minnesota. So it speaks to exactly what you are referring to. And the article points out that home ownership has declined from 46% at its height for Black homeowners in Minnesota to 25%.
Wow.
And the home ownership rates here are lower today than they were in Mississippi in the 1950s.
Wow.
And a study by the 9th Federal District Reserve Bank pointed out that there were more mortgage rejections for applicants of color in the Twin Cities metropolitan area than anywhere else in the United States. So the comments are directly on point.
Yeah.
And these were issues that we were talking about back in 2010. So we're now talking 12 years later when we created a community research group where we invited people. We would meet once a month. We would invite people to come in. Anybody could drop in and give their opinion. And then we actually hired community people to do the research, to teach them how to do, content analysis, to teach them how to do surveys. And then we had them actually do surveys with some of the businesses about what had been the impact of the foreclosures. Because when you talk about the health of a community, you're talking about who are the leaders living there. How many families actually own their homes there. And when that starts to be diminished, then you're really talking about the devastation, not just of individuals, but of communities as well. And that's what we were seeing in North Minneapolis.
Yeah, I don't want to appear to be self-serving, but in the 1990s, Professor and Dr. Samuel Myers and myself, the Urban Coalition and the Roy Wilkins Institute, as part of the Humphrey Institute, published a report called the 50-30 Project, where we examined what would be required to get 50% of 30-year-old heads of households in all 4 communities of color to own their homes within a 12-year period. And that project looked at the mortgage banking community. It looked at the financing, the real estate, and we had focus groups with the minority realtors and addressed a lot of these similar issues back in the 1990s and created quite a stir within the home ownership community, particularly within the mortgage banking community. So it's not a new issue and not one that we haven't known about for some time.
And now you're talking 25%.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And what that represents is
that's before COVID.
It represents a stripping of wealth from our community.
And it's time now to bring all those reports together. It's not like we don't know. We keep, every time there's a tragedy, we go back to diagnosing the problem. We know what the problem is. The diagnosis has been there. If Yusef is talking about the 90s and I'm talking about 12 years ago, okay, we've diagnosed the problem. But we have offered solutions, they weren't being listened to.
Yeah.
And I would add to what Yusef says is that there is also a bias against single-headed households of women in terms of getting mortgage. I have a colleague who was doing that research back in the 1990s, showing that women were less likely to be approved for these mortgages as well. So now that we have this, that we need to pull all those pieces of information together. We need a repository where the research that was done by Yusef and Myers, the research we did in UROC, Al, there are even articles. I wrote a piece that was a critique of the real estate. There's a magazine for people who are going to relocate, and they had a description of North Minneapolis that I challenged them on. I called them up, challenged them, and then wrote an article about it. So we have been very good at diagnosing this. How do we get the solutions that we generated into a space where people are not just reinventing the wheel in terms of saying, oh, we have a problem, now let's see what we can do. We already have solutions, right? And so how do we get those in spaces where people can look at them together and see how we can pull from that best practices so that something actually happens, as opposed to us just talking about it?
So what's the answer, Irma? What is the answer to that question? It's a great question.
Well, I think
the question.
I think having the realtors, if they're willing to do it, is to have someone who can pull those together and say, here are some possible solutions. Which of those can you implement immediately? So let's go for low-hanging fruit. What would that look like? So for example, I understand that Wells Fargo and I think Bank of America are now doing no down payment mortgages, right? Of course, at a time when the mortgage rates have gone up. But could they convene, maybe it's a conversation with Al McFarlane. How do people access those? Do they need a realtor? Can they do like programs over at UROC, which is open space that can hold 200 people, to tell people about it and then literally walk them through what is the steps that they need to take in order to access all of those things? I think it's really focused on what are the solutions as opposed to dissecting the problem over and over again. It distracts us and we get lost in it.
Yusef, what do you think? We've come here again and again and again, where from our side, we clearly have articulated and have explained and presented and discussed and debated. And the other side always feigns ignorance or I didn't know, or I didn't understand. And that's a dance we've done over generations, it seems to me. How do we move from that posturing to substantive and sustainable change that advantages us by removing structural barriers and disadvantages? What do you think, Yusef?
Well, one of my concerns is that the funding of nonprofit and other organizations within our community to address these issues is set up primarily on a competitive basis when you're talking about corporate and foundation giving programs. And there is little or no incentive, and often there are restrictions which prohibit organizations from collaborating together on common issues to take a gulp out of some of these issues rather than a series of little tiny nibbles. So you have one program in the projects, you have another one in the strip mall, you have one downtown, you have one in another community, and we have all these different colonies of African Americans in the Twin Cities. And there needs to be a greater effort for people with a common agenda to begin to work together and to speak with a common voice rather than trying to individually secure a few additional dollars for their program in their neighborhood, or from the freeway to the main business drag, from the park to the concrete wall, and not try to impact change that benefits people throughout the community. And I think that applies to the city, to the county, to the corporate foundation community. It applies to the legislature. It applies to the governor and the administration at the state of Minnesota, the Housing Finance Agency. And if we were to get behind our legislative, our elected and appointed officials and speak with one voice on these issues, we may perhaps be in a much better position to take a gulp out of these issues, again, rather than a series of little tiny nibbles, which is what the present day reality is. So I think we need greater communication, greater collaboration. We need greater education and information on these issues. And we've got to stop treating information as gold that we found that belongs only to us, that we refuse to share with other people for fear that they may be able to maximize it quicker and more effectively than we can, from our limited position. And there's a natural fear, and I would say fear, let's say hesitation on the part of smaller nonprofits or groups working on these issues to work with larger groups, because the larger groups are perceived to have greater access to corporate and foundation resources. So the fledgling or smaller or grassroots organizations are reluctant to interact with those other organizations. And I think we need to hold those organizations accountable and make certain that when they do launch initiatives, that those initiatives are represented by who the intended beneficiaries are. Because as was pointed out earlier, so often the resources go outside our community. The problem is not only defined, but the solutions are restricted by those people who, through no malice or foresight, may not represent the best interest of our community, or may not know what those.
Or there could be malice and foresight.
Well,
I mean, you're being kind.
I'm trying to be. Okay.
And I want to take it one step further, Yusef, because
Please.
I think that there is intentionality to pit communities against each other. So
That's
traditional
the
Black
competitiveness
communities
that I
are now
spoke to
pitted
earlier.
against refugee communities.
Yeah.
Both are Black. And basically, the folks who are doing the funding are sitting on the sideline, right? Letting us fight it out. And then they'll decide who gets, as you say, not even the big bucks, but like the little tiny cherries, right? And so we're seeing ourselves in competition because that's the structure that has been set up. So one solution, Al, is to bring all the leaders of the local foundations and banks together and saying, so what are you going to do? Let's have a policy forum. Let's have them articulate to the public on record recording, what are you going to do? How are you going to solve this? Because we know what the problem is. We don't need any more studies. We don't know any more consultants to tell us what the problem is. We know what the problem is. We don't own our own homes. And what are you going to do about it?
Let me speak to that and air a grievance that Al and I have had for 50 years, okay? When the media covers a business story, they at least want a reporter whose grandfather was in business and filed for bankruptcy. If they do a political story, they at least want somebody whose mom or daddy ran for office and failed. When it comes to covering an issue in our community, they will send any old nincompoop out to interview and then go back and craft a story that bears no resemblance to our reality. That is also true in the corporate and foundation community, because they will send out a recent college graduate who makes $65,000 a year, who has no knowledge, no relationships, no background, no research, no nothing. The only thing they ever learned about our community was how to stay the hell out of it. Okay, and they're expected to come out and in 30 minutes design a grand plan that's going to benefit us for generations to come, and that ain't happening. So we need more representation from highly qualified individuals that grew out of our community within those institutions who we are asking to partner with us, because many of the people who are coming, and I want to say through no fault of their own, aren't qualified, okay? They don't have the background, they don't have the experience, they haven't done the research, and they're not equipped to be the intermediaries to tell our story to the people in the white power structure who have the resources to impact change.
And I would say there's a generational difference as well. I mean, Sean Lewis has brought this up. If you look at who's being hired in philanthropy, there are a lot of BPOC people, right? Most of them are not over the age of 40. And so no offense, but you don't know what you don't know, right? And if you don't have the experience, they're not hiring people with experience because they don't want folks who've actually been out there, who sort of know the philanthropy landscape and who would have critiques of the way in which they've done business historically, which is for our people, and I've seen it, okay? So I've worked in philanthropy and I know how it works, the back end. And what I've seen is people bypass me as the program officer, go talk to the VP because they know that person. walk away with money immediately that's not only for the program, but for operations. What they give us is enough money to do the operations, and then we have to scrape, our nonprofits have to scrape and struggle on how to keep the lights on or how to pay, you know, the rental fee for their building. They don't get the luxury of that, you know. So I think we have to hold foundations accountable. It's great that you're hiring people, but you also need some senior people who have some experience and knowledge of the community that's older than like 15 years, okay? So that you put things in historical perspective as well.
Well, and I'm going to hush, but this brings us right back to the billions of dollars that were committed after the murder of George Floyd and the pennies that have been spent, okay?
Yeah.
Billions committed, pennies distributed. Okay, what's wrong with this picture?
And no George Floyd Square.
Yeah. I think there's two projects going on now, or not projects, but two movements going on in the state. One in the Rondo neighborhood that I think, just like you said, Brother Yusef, I think everyone needs to fall behind certain things that are happening so our voices are heard, because eventually Rondo is going to be, well, the attempts to revitalize that area and to really look at reinstalling some neighborhood components is, I think, the idea. But in terms of how it's been played out in the last several months, over the last year, I would say, it's been a little less than favorable for our community. And I think our community has to look and see, like you said, Dr. Irma, what exactly are our needs and what do we want to see? Because whether or not we end up with the bag at the end of the day, someone is giving out all this money for something to be done in our neighborhood on our behalf, but they're not using our ideas. They're actually going to build whatever they want to build. I think that area, as well as the north area, over north, there's lots of buildings and lots of a lot that's going on that we're kind of finding out after the fact. Oh, you know, this person have gotten a building, or these areas are being used or developed. And so I think just being even aware of what's going on in our neighborhood, because it's the same pattern of displacements that happens across the nation. Just like, you know, but we're not, I feel like we find out after the fact, or we come in after the immediate plan or the initial plan has been made, and then our contributions are marginal as opposed to being central, but it's supposedly in our name in terms of the function. And I do agree with the fact that the foundations and the state, the legislative funding, all those different sources that provide funds for events and or for businesses or these nonprofits, they actually do get away with putting out their very small tester type funds for our community, and then reserving the larger funding for other businesses and other agencies that they might be in good relationship with over the last how many ever years. And so that's been a challenge for us in Black Ink. Our organization started 4 years ago.
Sure.
And initially when we started, we went to some of the known funders and we were told that, oh, who are you partnering with? And so we were told that we needed to partner with several other organizations in the community. And what the ask was for the results or the impact, it was just unbelievable. So basically we turned down the first couple of grants we were offered because we were told that, you know, you need to partner with like 5 different agencies. You have to show impact all these different areas, and you're getting $15,000.
Exactly. I know exactly what you're talking about.
It makes no sense.
Crazy. It drives me crazy because I've seen what they do for other organizations. They don't ask white organizations to do this. They give money to organizations that work on us but are not of us. Right? And I think we have to start holding them accountable in very sort of public kinds of ways.
Yep.
You know, and Al knows I tell people I don't get mad, I don't do revenge, I write. And so, you know, telling the story and putting it out there in terms of what's wrong with this picture, I think is really important. And so I guess I better get back to that article I had about philanthropy, because
I think it's necessary.
that we need
What we found out yesterday, and Al interviewed Linda White with Model Cities, and she was just phenomenal. But what we found out was the land in Rondo, after they tore down the homes, that land was available. Linda bought was it the acreage of her original childhood home, and then she rebuilt? Well, I bet you the community didn't know that it was available. So it goes back.
Well, some did, and some didn't. But Yusef can probably address that. Yusef?
It wasn't widely publicized. Linda was the vice president for U.S. Bank in the Twin Cities.
Oh, yeah. She talked about you as the classmate, because when she talked about the black nuns, Al and I said, okay, Yusef.
We went all the way through school together.
Yeah, she was a delight.
Sharp woman. Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah.
But we were I'm an outsider.
The homes that were torn
we
down.
were really surprised at that.
The homes that were torn down to make way for the interstate were appraised at salvage value, not at market value.
Wow.
How much money can we get from the materials in this home as we tear it down? And that's what people were offered, and they were given 30 days. And this was true all the way through Summit University, through the Midway, and through North Minneapolis.
Yeah, she talked
and
about
so
that.
There is a case to be made for reparations for those people, just as I think I was reading the story about a family that was finally given the beach land that they had bought years ago. And I think we just have to give, what are the ways in which we who have knowledge can help communities reclaim and go back and say, you owe us, right? You owe us for that land because you underpriced it. You did it based on this so that you could take advantage of us. And that, that's exploitation. And so how do we make that case? And I think, that when you talk about this community, I think UROC stands as an example of what is possible, because all along the way, the community was involved in the architectural design, the construction, who worked on it. Remember that the university had its inclusion of women minority business enterprises. Their standard was 12%. We set it at 30. And I just went to the construction company. They have it as one of their projects. They hit 34% of all the subcontracts went to women minority businesses. So it is possible to do these things when there is leadership and there is a will.
Yeah.
Right?
And that's what we have to really jump in right now for. I know Rondo, there's so much around it, but we have to do it for Rondo. We have to do it for North Minneapolis, because just in terms of the piece that you said in regards to the houses being moved and or destroyed, some of those houses are like across the freeway still living. And it wasn't the funds that were gained from it being moved and actually resold what didn't go to the actual original owners. And so constantly moving our community around and moving the funds that actually are supposed to be directed to us, building some level of wealth, is definitely something that we have to hold tight to. Because I look at and I use In Black Ink as the example, because right now, since George Floyd, I think we've gotten significant funding in certain areas, not significant in terms of millions of any dollars, but we've gotten consistent small funding to do some of the work that we're doing. But part of that has been a struggle, and continue to be a struggle, with places that do hold, I mentioned the legislative dollars, like the Historical Society gets legislative money, the State Arts Board and the Humanities. I see some of them trying to really make some, some little concessions in regards to looking at the community and seeing how they can serve the community better by making the funds available. The Historical Society is one that every time I think about them, my heart just feels so, because they hold such a large part of our history in this state. And I feel like they continue to dismiss and just dismiss us on so many levels. And then they go to people who will work with them to get what they want to look like they're actually fairly archiving all of what our state, is about, including our community. But that's not the case. They won't support individuals.
We call that pimping.
Yeah. And it's something that we have to see.
For people in the listening audience, In Black Ink is a publishing initiative located in the same building with Golden Time Coffee Shop, and has a number of works for sale by local Black authors. So we need to be supporting organizations like In Black Ink within our community. And I'm proud to have most of your publications in my collection at home personally.
Well, I'm so glad that Irma is here, because Dr. Irma is a walking repository of knowledge that she is producing and intending to bring to the world in book form. And there seems to be a natural potential relationship between In Black Ink and Dr. Irma McClaurin. So hopefully this will set something in place that is going to bring both organizations forward in ways that you want to be brought forward to our community. But Raquel, take a minute to talk more about In Black Ink. I think that's one of the things I wanted you to do, was to spend time with the vision, the work, the particulars, and the challenges in the light of this conversation. You've been doing that already, but build out on that if you would.
Yeah. Well, I think,
and I want you to also take the time to talk about your own origin, your origin story, because you bring a diasporic awareness and consciousness, both from where you were born, but also in terms of your study and your scholarship in an Africana way of knowing.
Well, thank you. I was born and raised in Guyana up until an early age, and I grew up in New York. Came here for graduate school, met my husband, Anura, and have never been back. Well, I shouldn't say I've never been back, but I have never moved. So I'm in Minnesota for over, I want to say almost 30 years now. And one of the things we've always, as educator, I'm a trained school psychologist. I've been in the Minneapolis Public School for several years, and have done contracts with charter schools, done a little clinical work with some of our local African-centered clinicians. One who recently passed that I want to just give homage to, Brother Thad Wilderson, just transitioned. He was one of the first clinics that I actually worked in when I came back in the 90s. And we started In Black Ink as a community initiative. In 2016, we actually got a small chunk of money to do a statewide kind of like listening sessions across the state to see what the Black community, what people of African heritage want in terms of how to kind of capture their narratives, because we asked the question initially to the Historical Society, who typically hold a lot of the archives and actually have a lot of the stories of people who reside in the state. We asked the question, how do we capture these narratives before our elders and before those who have participated and built this community transition? And that question came out of the process of us trying to capture Elder Kofi Bobby Hickman's story. And he passed during the time we were, collecting his narrative. The importance was primarily helping people in our state, but then across the globe, hopefully, see that, our narratives are at the key to how we actually help build our own wealth, creating avenues through where we can connect and collect our own narratives, have our own people tell it without it being edited by others, have us publish it, archive it ourselves, is a way for us to actually hold our own wealth. And we consider that, that narrative, that story, that experience, wealth for us. So in doing that, we found from folks across the state that we do have, which is one of the things the historical society said, we can't find Black writers, we can't find Black editors, we can't find Black people in publishing. And so
do they read Insight News? Obviously not. I mean, because
exactly,
right there in their face.
you know, and that's one of the things we did. We, during that year, we actually went across the state. We collected up over 170 something, and that was a small number, 170 something published Black authors, people who have published. It wasn't all books, but there were articles, there were newspaper, you know, we looked at all the different publications just to kind of get a little range of where our people are. And from that, it led us to believe that, you know what, we really need the venues that our people can actually showcase their work and actually be elevated. Like exactly what you've been doing for years, Elder Al, just in terms of insight, what Tracy's been doing with Spokesman, what Tom Gita does with, you know, MSHLA. I mean, we have writers in our community, but what we found is that the opportunities are limited. And so even our editors need support in terms of trying to sharpen their skills and making sure that they're allowed to have experiences that help build their portfolio so they're marketable. Desktop and layout folks, we've been looking at every aspect of folks that actually contribute to a publication. And in Black Ink, pretty much have slowly been trying to develop avenues through which they can gain those experiences and build those skills. So a couple of years ago, we started what we are calling an editor's apprenticeship. We hired an editor, and we had a couple of young people who are aspiring editors who worked with this person for over 6 months, editing, you know, one of our projects, and they actually were the editors on the project. We look at the artists that we hire for our layout and found that, you know, some of them are really creative and very good, but are using outdated
software.
Yeah.
Technology.
And there was one brother who laid out the Towards an African Education book for us, who initially we were like, why? We were under a really tight deadline and was struggling to figure out why was it taking so long. Found out his program was like over 11 years old, and he was manually making edits and, you know, changes page by page, which is crazy in this day and age. And so we decided that, you know what, we'll have to pay people what they're worth and what they need to kind of, you know, to live and survive. But we also have to build in this training component and or resources that provide them with the resources they need to do the work that they can do. And so we're not just, you know, we don't call ourselves a publisher because we're a nonprofit. And since 2017, when we put in for our public, you know, our nonprofit status, we were told that we could not, even though they had 5 existing publishers that were nonprofit in the state of Minnesota. And that was the first year that they decided that they were not going to keep that as a status. So that was a little, I mean, we're still struggling with trying to find out like what's behind all of that, and have had like a nonprofit lawyer who's looking into it and things. But currently we're not a publisher, we're a publishing arts initiative, because primarily our work revolves around educating our community as to how to get our work and our narratives in a published form, documented, archived, stored, and shared. So I said all that to say, you know, I really appreciate the work that you, Brother Al, and you, Brother Yusef, and actually everyone in the state has done, because there's lots of gems here, and we're not trying to recreate anything. We're basically trying to make sure that our communities have an authentic voice, and it's not being shaped by the Star Tribune, or it's not being shaped by, you know, white editors or whoever it is find our stuff interesting to them.
So
but
talk about the event coming up. I am fortunate to have been invited to participate in the upcoming project, so I'm excited about it. Talk about that if you would, Sister Raquette.
Yeah, well, I actually put a link to the Eventbrite, but Elder Al is going to be the keynote for the Sankofa event and series, which is an annual event we do. It's a community event. It's open to all. Part of it is, well, there's music, usually live music. We'll have Thomasina, and she has a new a cappella group that will be performing, and a pianist, probably Tom West, excuse me. But Elder Al actually is the editor for the publication that should be coming out at the time that we have this event, but the publication will be pushed until spring. We have to talk a little more about that. But the theme of the event is Perilous Times, Defending and Defining the Spirit of Black Media. We found that during the George Floyd event, the media has been instrumental in promoting or communicating certain perspectives. And so last year, part of our theme were voices of our community. We looked at the voices, truth, and narratives of the Black media, and this is a continuation of it. So Elder Al, like I said, is the editor for that particular publication. We have contributors like Tracy Williams, Georgia Ford, Daniel Bergman, Danielle Brown, which is a professor at the U of M, Catherine Squires. So they're all media professionals that have contributed an essay or some form of writing to what will be a collection of our media specialists here in the state of Minnesota. We also have Henry Banks, he's more of a radio personality up in Duluth. Lissa Jones, Robin Hickman, Winfield. She would kill me if I left it off.
She would, yeah.
Yeah, but it's our goal is to really acknowledge the work that people are doing here and have been doing for 40, 50 years in some cases, and just really lift it up so that what you said, Dr. Irma, is so these young people aren't like making these moves without having some roots and having some knowledge of what's already come before them. Because I find that they go out and they try to start new things and then realize, down the line, there's been this stuff that's been embedded in our state, in our culture for so long that we just really need to build on and not start each time. So I hope we'll see everyone there, but spread the word. It's going to be an excellent event. It's hosted by Macalester College this year. It will be on Saturday, November 12th from 2 to 5. Like I said, live music. Keynote. The respondents will be a couple of the folks that I mentioned who are contributors to the book project. And then we always have a component that invites community to have conversations. So the last part is facilitated discussions by youth, high school and college youth, who actually do tabletop discussions around the theme. And then the theme for the next year comes out of that meeting and gathering. And just one last thing, I think it's April 3rd, we will have Michelle Norris come in to finish up, kind of wrap up that whole media conversation. And she will be at the University of Minnesota. They will host that particular event. And that's when the book we're hoping to have launched at that time. So, yep. We just do a little of what we need to communicate to our community how rich we are.
It's exciting. Well, thank you for including me and inviting me. I'm looking forward to our event next month. I wrote a piece that'll be in the document that reflected on how I chose and why I chose to enter the profession. And top of mind, I remember telling the story about being from Worthington, Minnesota. I'm born and raised in Kansas City, but my family moved to Worthington. And in Worthington, after I came out of a 2-year active duty stint in the Navy, and that followed my freshman year at Morehouse College in Atlanta, I came to Worthington en route to the University of Minnesota, spent a year there at the community college, and then came to the journalism school at University of Minnesota. Well, in Worthington, I was invited to and took a job writing for the daily newspaper. That's how I got in the profession of journalism and newspapering. And what I took away from my 1 year as a intern student reporter for the Worthington Daily Globe, which is an exceptional, was and is an exceptional country, newspaper, was that here was a community of around 10,000, 15,000 people that supported a daily newspaper. I think the Globe published probably 5 days a week or 6 days a week, maybe a weekend edition, and then daily. And it had local news and had national, international news that it got from the wires. And it was an award-winning, innovative publication. One of the earliest adopters of the press technology that allowed more color and offset printing. That was the process. So when I came to Minneapolis and St. Paul, Twin Cities, I got a job working as a reporter for the St. Paul Pioneer Press. And that led eventually to me launching Insight News under a magazine company that I worked for, and buying that property from them and starting my own newspaper, Insight News. The guiding thought all the time, and it still remains, is if Worthington, with a population of 10,000 people, could support a daily newspaper, why can not 100,000 Black people in Minneapolis and St. Paul support a daily newspaper? Which is a question that I think I have a duty to keep raising. And maybe a newspaper in the traditional sense is an operative now. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's digital, maybe it's social media. But the point is, how do we move ourselves, break free, jailbreak the limitations that the social structure has placed around us that allow us to be comfortable in living lives that are proscribed and that are limited by somebody else's intention and not by our own vision, energy, and volition. So that's where it is for me. And I think this is a great way for me to say that and to express that and to keep ringing this bell that, the world is something that we have to be and see ourselves as co-creators of. We are authors of the future, and we simply must decide and can decide that the version that we bring is the version that will prevail for the benefit of our people and for the planet and humanity itself. That's my take. That's my story. Irma, what you think?
Well, I'm always telling people about how important Black newspapers are, particularly in this moment of erasure, and the fact that traditional media has not been held accountable or been being responsible about the way in which it tells us about what's happening in the world. And so, as you know, I am, I've been writing for Insight News. What is it now? 12 years?
Yep.
I know, Yusef, you've probably been writing a lot longer, but it's been very important for me to have an outlet, and I'm constantly sending people to Al from South Africa, to people who are Afro-Palestinian, Afro-Latinos, and sharing with my colleagues on, the Association of Black Anthropologists that, we have to support Black media. We have to support Black newspapers. And I think, Al, I'm glad to see you being recognized. I think it's overdue and well deserved. So wonderful to hear. And Sister Raquette, I'll be in touch. I have a book of poetry that needs to be reprinted. So let's have a conversation. Maybe that's the outlet for it to happen. And I just think that there is a myth that Black people don't read. And that we can't, so publishers will say, well, what's but we've proven time and again. I mean, I'm looking at the book by Sandy Darity on reparations. It's now in its 4th edition from Duke University. They're making money hand over fist. It's 4th edition, and it just came out last year. So Black people are buying books, and all we got to do is look at Amazon, all these folks who've risen to the top because it's Black folks buying their book and white folks too, but there is a readership out there. I think we have to do more, start reading circles and getting our kids to stop relying on social media as their only form of information, and getting them to start reading and becoming critical thinkers and readers of whatever the content is, wherever it's coming from, that they need to look at it through a critical lens more so.
Yeah.
But thank you, Sister Roquette, for honoring Al. He's, it's well-deserved. Absolutely.
Dr. Irma, before we go on,
community
I wanted to let you know that I just read about Brittany Greiner, and it doesn't look like she's coming out of Russia.
Oh, dear. Okay,
Yeah.
I'll go back and follow it. Yes.
Yeah, the lawyer said that he just doesn't have a good feeling about it. Biden does, but it looks like she's getting really ill because she's in a cage. She wakes up and she's, behind 4 bars. And you had such a wonderful article on her, and I just wanted to bring that up. It's really kind of sad.
It is, because her whole health is built around someone who is athletic, who's used to being outside, who can exercise, and you can't do that when you're in prison, and particularly when you're over 6 feet, because the prisons weren't designed for tall people. So she's got to be immensely uncomfortable. Perhaps her health will be a reason that's for humanitarian reasons that she'll be able to come home, but then it means that she's got to go through tremendous recovery.
Well, I just wanted to let you know,
Yeah.
I knew we were out of time. And Raquel, congratulations.
Yes.
Honestly, that is so powerful. And we need, I write, I had to go through self-publishing, but to know that, Black Ink that's really encouraging.
Yeah.
For young people coming up, especially.
Yeah. And I think just one last thing, as we just suggest to young people and other folks to buy and read and look at, resources that are out there, have them look at who actually gets paid as well, because Amazon takes 60%.
Tell me about it.
We don't go through Amazon because of that, in terms of, trying to, you get widespread eyes on you, but at the same time, it just doesn't feel right for, our community with the small amount of resources to produce something and then have to put it through a vendor who will take the larger percentage, and then they only order 1 or 2 copies and they send it back at your expense if they don't need it or want it. So I just wanted to say that, have them look at who gets paid. But then the last piece was Elder Mahmoud El-Khati's distinguished lectureship is coming up.
Oh.
It's actually the day before the Sankofa event. So we're going to muscle through all of that good stuff.
Do you know who's speaking this year, Raquel?
Say it again.
Do you know who's speaking this year at the lectureship?
Yes, it's Alexander. No, wait. What is his name? I have to, let me look it up real quick.
November 11th at McAllister College, the
November 11th.
every other year Mahmoud El-Khati lectureship. It's been in effect for, I think, 11 years now.
Oh my goodness, he's just phenomenal.
I went last year, and they had the sister who is the head of the National African American Museum of History.
Oh
was
my
the
God.
speaker. Did an excellent
He's
job.
phenomenal.
Yeah.
He and Spike Moss, my goodness.
I
Powerful
can pull
men.
it up right here.
While you're looking for that, I'll just say that one of the things I'm working on now, as you were talking about collecting oral histories, is that I have a Fulbright funded grant funded by the State Department that's on Black Rochester narratives. This is Rochester, New York, not Rochester, Minnesota, a community-focused healing and preservation pilot project. And so we're taking a series of activists Black activists, and really asking them to respond to the events like Daniel Prude's death and other events that have happened over the last few years, and talk about what has been the trauma, but also what has been the healing around it. And then they're community curators, so we're going to ask them, how do we now take this material and get it out? What are the venues or platforms or ways in which you'd like to see it used? And then all of it's being archived in the Irma McClaurin Black Feminist Archive. I'm very excited about that, because it's while located in Massachusetts, its goal is to really build an archival home for Black women and their allies and friends. And we have gotten the materials of Z Edjo, and so you should know her. She is a Belizean writer. She's Belize's only external or international author, and her book Becca Lamb was used as part of the CXC exams, which Raquette should know about because that's the whole Caribbean thing. And then also Sheila Walker, who works on the African descendant presence in Latin America. She's done documentaries. We have over 5,000 of her slides and hundreds of hours of her footage, both the finished and the unfinished. So we're building this presence of stuff. And I'd love to come and be there on November, but I'll actually be in Amherst talking to the new dean of the library to make sure they remain committed to the work that I'm doing. So,
and Dr. Irma, where do you find all the time? My goodness.
That's
Bravo, and bravo to a wonderful, wonderful story on UROC. My God, what a history. And I love so much. Kudos.
I'd like to inform your readers about a book. It's called Silencing the Past. And it's by Michael Rolfe Trouillot. Trouillot.
He's an anthropologist. Yes, we know his work. We read it all the time.
And it covers Haiti, the Caribbean, and how deliberate the attempts were to remove African Americans from world history.
What was the title? I got the author.
Silencing the Past.
Okay.
Yeah.
And he's very well known and well cited among Black anthropologists.
And passed away about a year ago, Irma.
Yes.
Yeah.
Cool. And the presenter at Dr. Elkati's distinguished lecture is Dr. Uhuru Williams. He's the university chair and professor of history and the founding director of, the Racial Justice Initiative. So he'll be the keynote.
Excellent. Look forward to it.
Thank you so much, Yusef, as always. Thank you so much, Dr. Irma. Thank you so much, Brenda Lyle-Gray. Thank you so much. This has been a wonderful hour. I love being with you. And let's do it again next Thursday. I'm Al McFarlane. We'll see you.
Good seeing you, Dr. Irma. You're on solid ground before you get up in the air again.
Yes, I am.